over 650 members across Canada, and our community is diverse. And quite simply, our goal is to get more women on boards. So welcome to today. We're delighted to be hosting this virtual session with our sponsor, Odgers Berndtson, on the topic of, are you ready for public service boards? We have an experienced group of speakers today. We've got directors that are well-versed in public sector boards. We have an executive board recruiter specializing in public sector boards, and they will try to, throughout their conversations, take everything from how to prepare an application to submit, to an interview process, to unique issues that they face on public sector boards. So now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our esteemed moderator, Elaine Roper. And Elaine, I don't know how I should introduce you, but a longtime friend, shall I say, long time before we even met each other. Delighted to have you today. Elaine is the head of board practice at Odgers. Elaine comes with over 35 years of extensive senior management experience and has worked with numerous organizations throughout North America, Europe, and Asia in technology, financial services, not-for-profit sector, public-private partnership organizations. Her particular expertise lies in corporate and board governance, executive talent, management, and search and organizational development, and is a well-versed and well-experienced board member on a multitude of not-for-profit boards. So without further ado, Elaine, over to you.
Thanks so much, Deborah. Much appreciated, and delighted to once again host a panel of really expert women and really very accomplished individuals who I've had the pleasure to work with. So I appreciate your kind introduction, Deborah, and just want to do a very quick overview of both Wendy and Barbara Kylie's background. So Wendy is an FCPA, CPA, and has her ICD designation. And her remarkable professional career has spanned professional services, retail, oil and gas, mining, and now energy. Her board experience includes being the board chair for Ontario Power Generation, or OPG, and she is the chair of the audit committee for both Kenora Resources Inc. and Noranda Income Fund, and also a member of the Department of Audit Committee for Transport Canada. Last year, Wendy was named one of Canada's top 100 most powerful women and received her fellow chartered professional accountant designation from her fellow professionals. Wendy was also selected as a Diversity 50 candidate in 2016 by the Canadian Board Diversity Council. An extremely accomplished individual, and welcome, Wendy. And I'd also like to introduce Barbara Kylie, who's also got a very long, illustrious career. She's a retired partner at Ernst & Young's Advisory Services practice and has been a management consultant with global consultancies for over 35 years. She's got a proven track record of growing professional services organization and across and has worked with many, many different groups over her time. She is the president and board chair for Ontario 211 Services. She also serves on departmental audit committees for the Shared Services Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada. She's been a board director at Arnprior Regional Health, was a member also of the applicant board for the New Digital Research Infrastructure Organization, has been board chair of Bruyere Continuing Care, and was very involved with the ITEC, the Information Technology Association of Canada. Barbara is a recipient of the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal in recognition of her accomplishments to advance the information tech industry in Canada. So welcome, Barbara, and two remarkable women who we'll speak with in just a moment. I would like to just start off by providing a little bit of context and a background before we launch into our discussion, and address some of the most commonly asked questions that I get asked when I speak with candidates about board opportunities. And it'll set some context for our discussion today. I know you have a lot more questions following the insights provided by Wendy and Barbara, but hopefully this will give you some foundational information about public board service. So what do we mean when we say public sector boards? The sector encompasses, broadly speaking, government-funded organizations, agencies, crown corps at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels. The funding can vary widely, but principally these agencies receive some level of funding from one or more levels of government. So within the public sector, there's a significant choice of organizations you can choose from, everything from arts and culture, financial services, regulatory organizations, healthcare, infrastructure, services, electricity and energy, social assistance, departmental audit committees, conservation, and the list goes on. Something for every interest and skills area. So if you choose to serve in the sector, it is often a choice to give back or contribute to the building or running of your city, province, or country. Some people choose to dedicate their whole service, a board service, to this arena, and others use it to round out their board portfolio, or even to use it as a stepping stone to getting on corporate boards. The organizations can be small or large, have six-figure budgets, or assets and operating and capital budgets in the billions, and they're as complex to govern as any corporate board. There's usually one shareholder in a public sector organization, the government at one level or one of the levels I outlined earlier. And typically there are many more stakeholders than you would find in a publicly traded company. Compensation, service on a public sector board is typically a give back. And compensation can vary widely from voluntary service and reimbursement of your reasonable expenses to per diems for meetings, or in some cases, modest competitive retainers. Remember, we as taxpayers are footing the bill for these organizations, and compensation is not a key driver in joining these boards. And lastly, the basics of governance are the same for these boards as for others. Fiduciary obligations, duties, conflict of interest are similar, but you're held to a higher standard, a hybrid really between not-for-profit and corporate governance. And finally, the appointments process is unique and can be complex to negotiate. As you typically sign up on a government website, gov.ca, for instance, you can sign up for as many agencies as you wish, but you can generally only serve on one board at a time. And with that primer, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists and hear what advice they can share. So our first question is really, can you share which public sector boards you're currently on and what drew you to those particular boards? How relevant was your professional experience in joining these boards? I'm going to kick off by asking Barbara to answer that first.
Thanks, Elaine. I want to say thanks so much for the opportunity to be here and talk about something that I'm very passionate about and really enjoy. So thank you, Elaine, and thank you, Deborah, for the opportunity. So as Elaine mentioned at the outset, I'm on two public sector boards for the federal government. These are departmental audit committees, or DACs, as we call them. And the DACs act as an advisory or an oversight committee for the deputy ministers who are in charge of these big departments. So I'm on two DACs. One is for Shared Services Canada. SSC is a relatively new department. It was established in 2011. And it's an organization that provides IT services to the federal government. It has about 7,000 employees, and it supports 40 plus departments and agencies, right across the country, coast to coast. The second DAC I'm on is the Public Health Agency of Canada. So the agency is responsible for public health, emergency preparedness, infectious disease prevention and control, and of course is smack in the middle of our COVID agenda right now. I'm also on two public sector funded boards. These are not-for-profit boards, and both of these boards are very closely monitored by government. So while they're seemingly arm's length, they live very much by very strict government oversight and regulations that come with that. So as Elaine mentioned again, I'm the board chair for the Ontario 211 service. 211 is a free service that connects Ontarians to over 60,000 community and social services right across the province, 24/7. 150 languages. And as you can imagine, it's highly in demand these days to support Ontarians in need during these particularly difficult times. Finally, I'm on Arm Prairie Regional Health. It's a regional-based acute care, long-term care, community service organization right in the lower Ottawa Valley. So as I mentioned, these boards are really closely aligned with government. They're under tight government scrutiny and control. So to answer your question, professional experience on this, my background is very relevant to each of these boards. All of these boards require strong governance and oversight, risk management, strategic planning, digital and service transformation, financial and quality management, things you would typically see in a board. So my background in public sector, having been in government, private sector, and the consultancies that you mentioned, Elaine, and board governance experience are all very useful to support these public sector boards.
That's great, Barbara. Thanks for tying that together and making that connection. Wendy, do you want to talk to us about your experience and your work?
Thanks, Elaine. It's a pleasure to be here with you here today. I am currently the chair of the board for Ontario Power Generation. At OPG, we generate over 50% of electricity in Ontario. And as you mentioned earlier, Elaine, we have one shareholder being the Premier of Ontario. I also sit on a Department of Audit committee, similar to Barbara, ADAPT for Transport Canada. And Transport Canada is a federal agency that deals with the air travel, the road travel, the waterway, and the airports. So it's pretty complex organization. Both of them are. And both organizations, when I was appointed to the board, they were looking for an accountant, a CPA, and I certainly fit the mold. And my professional experience was definitely very relevant to both boards. As Barbara mentioned, oversight, risk, audit, financial, governance, and even compensation, was skill sets they were both looking for. You asked us what drew us to these boards, and for me, it was the size, the complexity, and wanting to give back to the community. I knew not-for-profits wasn't something that I wanted to do, but sitting on public sector boards is my way of giving back. When I was starting my board journey, a lot of recruiters would say to me, if I'm looking for an audit committee chair of a junior mining company, I'll call you. And I really didn't want to be stuck being the audit committee chair for all these junior mining companies. I really wanted what you call a diverse board portfolio, and sitting on these public sector boards certainly allowed me to do that.
That's great. Thank you. And we'll come and talk a little bit more about the complexity, the kind of work that you do a little bit later on. So did you find that by serving on a public sector board, it really set you up to serve on others? And actually, Wendy, I think you got to your public sector board a little bit differently than one might expect. Can you just talk to us about that?
Certainly. And my work experience has always been with publicly traded companies listed on the Toronto Exchange, New York. And so I actually sat on publicly traded companies first, and then went to the public sector to diversify my portfolio. And also to mitigate some of the risk of actually sitting on publicly traded boards. I wanted a well-rounded board portfolio. My process with OPG came about being from a recruiter who was looking for an accountant, and they actually found me on the Diversity 50 list from the Canadian Board Diversity Council. So my advice is, if you can get recognized, I had no idea why they reached out, and when I actually asked, they said, "Look, I saw your name on the list and that you were an accountant, so I wanted to reach out and see if you'd be interested in the OPG board." So get yourself out there, get your name recognized, and there's lots of opportunities. In terms of OPG, I also want to explain, I didn't get appointed to the board and become chair. No. I was thrilled to be appointed to the board. I sat on 4 subcommittees for a 2-year period. And at the end of that 2-year period, they asked me if I would like not to chair the audit. They asked me to chair the Compensation, Leadership, and Governance Committee, which I was absolutely thrilled about, because it was not chair of another audit committee. I thought, it gives me a great opportunity to learn something new, and go into a committee that I didn't know a lot of. And then 3 months after that, they asked me to be board chair. So I had to find my own replacement. So it's what I liked about it was it gave me time to understand and really get to know the business and my fellow board members before I took on a leadership role. In terms of Department of Audit Committee for Transport Canada, I had applied and my application straddled a federal election. So it took them 2 years to call me back. I almost forgot that I had applied, but I don't think that's normal. I think it was because I straddled a federal election, and I know that they continually call me for opportunities. So apply, get your name in there, because there are tons of opportunities. And I would say, don't be discouraged by the name Department of Audit Committee. They're not all looking for accountants. They're looking for people with diverse background and to serve on these boards. And usually there are 3 to 4 members on a Department of Audit Committee. So it's not a big committee to sit on.
That's great. And you raised a couple of really important points. And I think it's really important, again, to remind people that you don't necessarily get on a board. You don't get on a board to be the accountant. You get on to bring all the experience that you've gained through your professional experience and as being an accountant, and that you really need to be able to address all kinds of issues. With that, Barbara, do you want to just address the same question and give us your perspective on that? Thanks, Wendy. I appreciated your response.
Right. So thanks. I have served on other public sector boards in the past. One that was really interesting for me it's a bit of a long name, but it's called the New Digital Research Infrastructure Organization, NDRIO. And it was almost like a public sector startup. So it was really unique in that. And I was one of 4 individuals we referred to as the applicant boards. We were from quite diverse backgrounds right across the country. And our role was basically to stand up this new organization that was going to support digital research right across the country, right? In our over 140 of our major universities, our scientific research institutes, hospitals are all part of this ecosystem. So the 4 of us, again, very diverse backgrounds, we incorporated the organization, we established the bylaws, we hired the new board, that was going to be there for the long term, very diverse and very interesting, worked with Audrey's on that, I might add. We hired the CEO, and then at that point in time, the applicant board, we stepped aside and the new board was put in place to run it. But we were there as directors, as members, just to create this new organization that really is at the forefront of innovation in the country. So it was a great purpose, and it was fun to be involved in. In terms of, I came at the public sector boards a bit differently. As I was coming up to retirement and knew that I wanted to focus on boards, I got my ICD designation. I got some of the fundamentals in place, but I started with the not-for-profit boards. And the thing that was important for me at the get-go is I really needed to connect with the purpose and the mission of the organization. I spent a lot of time thinking about how I wanted to give back and where I thought that my skills and the impact would be the greatest. So I started from a portfolio of not-for-profit, predominantly in health, social services, and digital information technology. And as a result of the not-for-profit experience, that gave me the governance experience to be able to apply to the public sector boards that I sit on right now. So in terms of one question, is it easy to get on a public sector board after you've been on one? My response is absolutely yes. These are very transferable skills between the public sector boards. And one thing that's really important is as you start to get on these boards that work with governments, you're getting to understand the inner workings of government, how stuff gets done, how decisions are made, and it's very complex. And so that's a set of experiences that's very transferable, and it's valuable for new public sector boards that you're looking at.
Yeah, that's a great insight, Barbara. And I think the other thing is that these public sector boards are so accountable for key initiatives, key policy initiatives, legislation, and you can advise the government and how some of this policy gets set by serving on these boards. The Embryo board actually is a key part of Canada's innovation strategy, and OPG is a key supplier of energy, not just to Ontario, but you actually are doing work beyond the borders as well, which is interesting. So tell me, let's start with you, Barbara. Tell me, what do you find most compelling and what do you enjoy the most about these boards? And what has been the biggest surprise for you in serving on the boards that you're on?
Well, the thing, excuse me while I adjust my earpiece here, while the technology fails me. The thing I like the most is the complexity slam dunk on the departmental audit committees. As Wendy mentions, these aren't audit committees in the traditional sense. They're more like senior advisory committees to the deputy minister. And since I've been in government at senior roles before, I wasn't surprised by the staggering scale and size of these coast to coast organizations. I knew the organizations were professionally run, and I knew that the myth just wasn't true that public sector executives were less productive than their private sector counterparts. My experience was that my government colleagues were some of the smartest, most strategic, resilient, and impressive I've ever worked with in my career. But what did surprise me, and this is the most enjoyable part for me, DAC members are presented with a myriad of issues that cover the full range of public policy, program delivery, innovation, risk management, public use of funds, transformation, and so many other topics. And so when you weigh into these topics, it requires a lot of really careful preparation and some very interesting debate, I might add. It's also mindful that you need to be aware of the priorities of the government of the day. And that requires consideration of potentially some competing agendas, some competing policy agendas, economic, social, health, heritage, security, financial, sustainability. It's almost like there are multiple competing bottom lines that factor into the decision process that take place on these public sector boards. There's always trade-offs. These problems are not simple ones to resolve generally. One of the biggest learnings for me, though, was it's the complex web of legislation, regulations, policy, and oversight bodies that both guide and constrain these public sector organizations. So as members, as directors, it's really important to understand the legislation and the authorities, basically the swim lanes that they have to be able to make their decisions and to move around. And finally, the last thing for me is just when you get a sense of the amount of oversight that the federal government is subjected to, it literally is daunting. They have their own internal audit functions. There are central agencies who control funds and authorities. There's the Auditor General, and of course, there's Parliament. So those would be some of my big takeaways and learnings from these public sector boards.
Yeah, I think you've really reinforced the complexity. So if people are thinking, you know, are these complex boards, is this complex business? It's very complex. Wendy, I'm sure you also have firsthand experience with all of this. Do you want to share that?
Sure. Thanks, Elaine. Why I chose these boards, or the compelling reasons, is I really want to give back to the community, to the province, to Canada. And as I mentioned before, not-for-profit and asking people for money isn't something I like to do. So I knew I couldn't do that through the not-for-profit route. So I went through the public sector route. So in terms of the biggest surprise, I go back to what Barbara and even you, Elaine, was saying, is how complex these organizations are, and how strong their level of governance is. And to be honest, how diverse the boards are, and you know, the mandate and the mission to make those boards even more diverse. So those were some of the biggest surprises. My biggest learning, again, would be the breadth and depth of the organization, and how much time it takes to actually really understand the business and the mandates. As Barbara was saying, it's really complex. And I would say not all public sector boards are the same, and they vary in size and complexity. And so if you're not comfortable sitting on a big board, You might want to start with a smaller one, but there's lots and lots of opportunities out there in the public sector.
Mhm. Absolutely. What would you say was your biggest learning?
My biggest learning
Mm,
was how do you deal with having one shareholder? For me, I've sat on public traded boards, and you deal with multiple shareholders and institutional shareholders, but how do you deal with one?
mhm,
And I would say that would be one of my biggest learning.
mhm. And so one question that sometimes comes up is, how involved does the government get? How arm's length or how involved does the government get in the decision making?
That's for me as well.
Yeah, yeah. And
Okay.
then I'll come back to Barbara on that one.
Management deals with the shareholder most of the time, and you have to work within the various mandates. I look at it as playing within the guardrails and understanding the frameworks of those guardrails is challenging. And how do you manage through them? You don't have these guardrails on a publicly traded company, but you certainly have to work within for public sector. And one example is compensation. How do you compensate your employees, and which framework does that fall into? That to me would be one of the big challenges of dealing with a public sector board.
Okay. Barbara, is there anything else you would want to add to what Wendy has said? And it's certainly that's one of the challenges, I think, of being on a public sector board is the frameworks, the compensation, the expenses. It's all taxpayer dollars, right? So there's a lot of focus on that.
And so at the federal level, and maybe just stepping back a little bit, government involvement varies depending on the structure of government that you're dealing with. So at the federal level, if you're on a public sector board there, the departments itself, the deputy ministers have a fair degree of freedom in terms of the decisions that they make. They really have pushed accountability to the deputy heads to make decisions as required. What that means, though, there still is a guardrails, as Wendy has said, that decisions can be made within each of the federal governments. The minister gets a mandate letter from the prime minister that basically says, here's your marching orders. These are the things that I expect you to commit to and deliver on. And oftentimes these mandate letters stipulate results and outcomes to be achieved within the mandate period. And they often require needing to work with other departments. Very rarely would there be a siloed decision making, again, because of the complexity and the interconnectedness of government. So those mandate letters really spell out what needs to get done and when, and in certain cases by who. There's also the things that we talked about, legislation, et cetera. But there are certain central agencies in government at the federal level, Treasury Board Secretariat is an example, who really make some fundamental decisions. Money can't be spent in a department, even though it's within the budget, so to speak, unless it's been approved by a central agency. So the decision-making approach is quite complex. Again, some are within the mandate of the deputy minister, the deputy head, and others really need to be looking to the center to get the appropriate approvals in order for them to execute against mandate letters.
That's a great insight, Barbara. I'm going to skip a question just in the interest of time. So I'm going to ask you, what kinds of issues do you typically deal with on these boards, and what can you expect in terms of serving on one of these boards? And I think we've got a question about time commitment, so the complexity of the issues. So you can address, the kinds of issues and how much time it would take to deal with some of these issues. I'm going to turn to, why don't we go to Wendy on this one, and then we'll come back to you, Barbara.
Okay. In the last year, we've been dealing with a lot of COVID issues. How do you work from home? How do you keep the business running? OPGs and central service. So COVID, same issues I normally deal with my publicly traded boards: strategy, reputation, operations, and governance. So I certainly think what you learn on a public sector board could be transferred to other boards. In terms of time, OPG we meet every quarter. We spend about 3 full days in meetings. On my DAC, it used to be 3 times a year for a day. That has changed during COVID. We're meeting a little more frequently. I would say 5 times a year, but for shorter meetings. The DAC has less personal commitment for time than my other boards because of the fact we don't meet as frequently, and they're not all every 4 months for quarterly reporting purposes. So they're slightly different. So the time commitment is slightly reduced. If you've got a full-time job and you want to be able to sit on a board, a DAC is a great one because there's lots and lots to learn about oversight, and it is about strategy. So that is critical in terms of learning and understanding how the government runs.
How much time does it take you to prepare for one of these board meetings? I'm almost afraid to ask.
My corporate boards, including OPG, is a lot of time spent reading, a lot of time reading. Actually, you're spending maybe the week before the meeting 3 days reading materials. I don't know how anybody can sit through and read all the materials at once. I have to take it in chunks. It is a lot of time, and it's a lot of onboarding time. It's a lot of questions for management. It's you want to make sure you're well prepared going into these meetings. So it is a lot of time commitment to review the materials and to really get to understand what's happening with the business.
I'm going to come back to you after and ask you about onboarding and orientation. But in the meantime, Barbara, I'm going to ask you the same sort of question. So what kind of issues at 211? That must be very, very interesting, the kinds of issues that come up there. And can you talk a little bit about your experience there and some of the other?
Sure. I mean, I across all the boards that I sit on, the 2 departmental audit committees, 211 service and Armed Prior Health, hands down, top issue is COVID. Hands down. I mean, it affects the organizations in different ways. Think of Shared Services Canada, right? They had to pivot 400,000 Canadian federal government employees to remote work in the matter of a few weeks. I mean, these are just incredible changes. And so a lot of the issues relate to program delivery, service delivery. Workforce wellness is really key. We hear so much about mental health and those kinds of things along the way. For 211, 211 was relatively unknown, other than for certain like emergency services and others. But the what's happened with COVID, of course, is, and our motto is, when you don't know where to turn for help, call 211. And what you get is a warm voice at the end of a phone, or there are other channels, chat and email and other things too. But what really differentiates things, it's the warm voice. So you can imagine the nature of the issues that Ontarians are dealing with nowadays with COVID: mental health, financial insecurity, food insecurity. I need a ride to my my vaccine appointment, hopefully, right? So the myriad of issues are very complex and interrelated. So COVID has, in some of our channels, we've seen over 100% increase in volumes. And again, what we do is we track what Ontarians are calling for. We call them what these are the needs, but more important, we also track the unmet needs. So I call, I'm looking for a service in my community in Ontario, and that service just isn't available. So we work with the community leaders, municipal leaders, to help them put in place programs and supports along the way. So COVID has really mobilized the 211 service in the province to be there for Ontarians during some really, really wrenching times. So COVID absolutely is a top issue that all of the boards are dealing with now. But there are other issues that all the boards, it's the whole financial management. Enterprise risk is getting even more interesting these days, lots of topics. One area that I'm seeing a lot more of is a focus on large scale digital IT transformation projects that go along with that. I'm seeing that across all the boards. all these organizations are looking to digitize and do more things online. And what comes with that is a set of risks that are unique to large scale project management. I think the other thing that I'm seeing, as I mentioned, it's a real focus of boards on culture and workplace wellness. Our remote reality, while it's working for some, is not working for many. And so that topic comes up at every one of our meetings. In terms of time commitments, it varies. Being the chair of 211 it can be 20 to 30 hours a week, some weeks. And again, it's very COVID related, but we also have a number of initiatives underway. Departmental audit committees, the ones that I'm on, we meet monthly or close to monthly for half day-ish. The rule of thumb I would use is it takes you twice as long as the length of the meeting to get yourself ready. I mean, it's a significant amount of prep time. So I would imagine that after COVID and things simmer down a little bit, we may go back to a more regular quarterly cadence. But I think what some of the DAC members are finding is that having these short bursty discussions maintains that continuity because again, the issues continue to evolve so quickly. So some of them are less time, some can be quite significant. And again, if you really like what you're doing, it doesn't feel like work. It's just enjoyable.
And it's just always learning, right? All of these boards really offer a great opportunity to learn and stretch your skill sets and really go beyond that. We have a question around sort of how do you get on to one of these boards and you know, how do you manage the process to ensure that the vacancies are filled in a timely fashion, and how do you get the skills and experience that you need on these boards? And then just an add-on, you know, how are you addressing diversity in terms of your board renewal process? I think that's a very, very key question that we get asked all the time.
You want me to start, Elaine?
I'll turn to you, Wendy. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. We have a saying, what gets measured gets done. So in 2018, the OPG board, we established a formal diversity and inclusion policy with specific measurable targets, which we hold ourselves publicly accountable. So our target is 50% equity seeking members and 30% women representation for our independent directors by 2022. We actually achieved and exceeded our target at the end of 2020. We have over 50% equity seeking members and over 40% women. So I'm thrilled to say, we've met target and exceeded it. And this is, it's important to us to have board members that represent the population or the communities that we serve. In terms of your other question, and in terms of skill sets, nowadays most boards have a board skills matrix. So you've assessed and you've determined what skills, expertise, experience you're looking for that can drive your strategic corporate objectives. And directors are recruited based on those skills. So we look for skills, we look for accountants, we look for lawyers, capital markets, HR, labor relations, IT and cyber, just to name a few. And we target, if we're replacing, if we've got a vacancy, we'll target a specific skill set. And we often do that, and we will definitely interview members of diverse groups. That's one of our criteria for our interviewing process. And what we do is we ask recruiters to go beyond the Rolodex or the database and look for, the next generation of corporate directors. We've appointed 4 in the last, I think, 18 months, and 3 out of the 4 are female. Very proud to say, and those have been targeted searches for specific skill sets.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'm going to ask the same question of you, Barbara, in terms of how are you able to get the vacancies filled, and are you able to get the candidates and with the skill sets that you're looking for, and how are you dealing with diversity?
Right. So the approach is different for the for the 2-in-1 and for ARH, right? So like Wendy says, there's a skills matrix. Certainly are looking for an increasingly diverse board, and again, really looking to represent the communities that we serve, right? That's really important, and especially in 2-in-1. So that's a journey. With 2-in-1 as an example, it's really important for us to have geographic diversity. We have a DEI policy too, and a framework that we use, but geographic diversity for us is important. What Ontarians need in the north of this province, with its vast expanse and limited services, is quite different from what we need in the 613 area code. So having geographic diversity on the board is also important for us too. What I thought I might do, Elaine, is talk a little bit about the process and diversity for the departmental audit committees, right?
Yeah, perfect. That would be great.
The departmental audit committee recruitment process, it's really diligent and it's very structured, and it's managed centrally by one of the government agencies. These are government appointments that are approved by Treasury Board. So Treasury Board is a group of cabinet ministers, and the role of Treasury Board is to provide oversight on management, expenditure, and the employer. As Wendy said, it's a long recruitment process, right? You should expect it's going to take a year along the way. The DAC appointments are either 3 or 4 years, and you can renew them once. You can only sit on 2 DACs at a time. And you can see what DACs, what opportunities are coming up by looking on the government website. It actually will show all of the departments. It'll show who the DAC members are and when their terms are coming up for renewal. So you get a good sense of when the turnover will happen. Each DAC is looking for a very, they're looking for a breadth of skills and a breadth of lived experiences. And it's really important there too. And it can be quite specific to the department or agency. So looking at your own background and your passion and where you have an interest can help you align with which of the 100+ federal organizations you might have an interest in serving with. So when the DACs also, of course, look at diversity, and they're looking at gender, ethnicity, geography, language, and other factors. And generally, the diversity requirements will be stated in the application, so you'll know that up front. So while the candidates for each of the departmental audit committees, the candidates are suggested to the deputy minister, it really is the deputy minister who decides who will sit as external members on the Departmental Audit Committee. The chair of the Departmental Audit Committee may have a say in that decision, but more often than not, they may just have to play the hand that they're dealt as it relates to the DAC members who are there along the way. So it's a structured, diligent, long process. It's a government appointment process to go through, and there are a number of opportunities that you can see by looking at when the vacancies are coming up.
That's great. Thanks for summarizing that and for being forthright about it. We've got a couple of questions, but just before we finish up, I'd love to hear from each of you. And maybe I'll go to you first, Barbara. What suggestions and advice would you have for women considering public sector boards?
Well,
Final thought.
I'm gonna be a little biased here. I would say absolutely go for it. I mean, I guarantee you'll be amazed with the complexity and the scope. You'll be impressed by the commitment and the resilience of these organizations, especially in times like now. And as Wendy said, it's helping to fulfill, a role that has the public good in mind. And there's a lot that comes from that. So as you're thinking about doing this, as I mentioned earlier, think about organizations where you really connect with its purpose and mission. Do your research. All the information's out there, the departmental reports, performance reports, public accounts, it's all out there for you to do your research. Find out who's on these boards, contact them. If it's a process that's managed centrally, contact the coordinator of the process to find out more about the application process along the way. And again, based on my background, my advice would be to build your board resume through not-for-profit boards if you can. And you'll learn about how government works and how these organizations are funded. And it will really help with understanding the inner workings of government and how decisions get made and how things happen. So, and obviously, I should say, Elaine, work with organizations like Odgers who are right at the coalface of identifying these opportunities and candidates too.
Thanks, Barb. Appreciate that. So Wendy, your final pearls of wisdom for this group.
I would say make sure your LinkedIn account is up to date. If the public sector is going through a recruiter, you'll often find that the recruiters will go through LinkedIn. So make sure your account is up to date, because you could be on a long list and not realize it. So if you've got out of date information, or you know what, you've come off a certain not-for-profit board, make sure everything's up to date, because you could be taken off a long list just because we see that you sit on too many boards, whereas that's not really the case. My other thought would be, if you're really interested in sitting on public sector boards, is find someone that sits on one and have a one-on-one, a virtual coffee, somebody that can provide you some advice. There are a lot of opportunities out there. If you go through the Ontario website, there are tons, and it just depends on what you're interested in. And there are lots of opportunities on the federal side as well. So don't be discouraged, but you have to do some of your own research to figure out what best fits you personally.
That's great. Very good advice. And as you say, it's really important that you have your board CV up to date, and that you have your LinkedIn up to date, and that the two really complement each other. So I think we'll turn now to some of the questions that have come up. So I'll just work my way through some of these. So there's questions about, a lot of talk about lawyers, and do you need to be a professional to serve on one of these boards? And absolutely not. I have neither my CPA nor a law degree. And I've been sitting on not-for-profit and public sector boards for a great many years. Really, it's an opportunity to learn. And I think really what you have to do by going on the government website. So there is the federal government website, and there are hundreds of opportunities. Really, the legislation requires that if there's a board opportunity in a public sector organization, it needs to be posted publicly, unless there's some compelling reason for it to be confidential. But otherwise, all of these opportunities are listed, and there are hundreds of them, provincially, federally, and also municipally. So what you've got to do is you've got to go onto the website, you look around, see what interests you. You can sign up, as Barbara and Wendy have suggested, you can sign up for as many as you like, but you'll only be considered in the departmental audits. You can only do 2 at a time. And in respect to other public sector agencies, it's really 1 at a time. I've actually been in a search where we had a candidate who had applied for a couple of positions. We were in the middle of a process. She was accepted and confirmed as the chair of the other agency. We had to pull her out of our process. So that's just something to be aware of. Really, as both Wendy and Barbara have articulated so well, these are complex organizations. They're complex issues. The kinds of issues that you'll be dealing with will really prepare you to serve on any board. And it also gives you an appreciation for how complex our country and our provinces are to govern and to rule, and the many issues and the concerns of the many different stakeholders that have to be taken into consideration in terms of delivering services and providing these building. I mean, if you look at Infrastructure Ontario, none of the courthouses, hospitals, schools in the province would get built without Infrastructure Ontario. Barbara talked about the services 211. Just the breadth of services that are provided there, and OPG, and it's just has such a responsibility in terms of the distribution of energy, electricity, and across so many sectors in the province. I mean, you could shut us down. If you go down, we go down, right? So very important work that you all do. And I know there are people who have different backgrounds, sales, whatever, but you don't typically get onto any board, and not particularly these boards, to go to be the accountant, the lawyer, the whatever. You're there to use the breadth of your total experience and bring that to bear. It's really integrative thinking that these boards look for in the same way that other boards look for that. So I hope that has addressed that question. Digital transformation, I think there's probably not an organization on the planet that's not going through digital transformation at this point. I think it's a very hot topic for all boards. And Barbara touched on the new digital research infrastructure organization, which really is looking at trying to capture all the digital research, all the incredible computing that goes on across the country in terms of doing research and protecting and safeguarding that, which I guess is one of the other things. And we do have a minute or two left. Just how important is cyber for both of your organizations? I mean, that's such a critical issue. We keep hearing about cyber hacks, etc. So maybe just before we close down, just a thought on cyber, and maybe I'll kick off with Wendy.
Cyber is really big for us. We just appointed our first cyber expert to our board. Really looking forward to working with her and seeing if we can improve our cyber. Cyber digital transformation, I know with everybody working from home, phishing is also a big concern for a lot of companies. I would say most publicly traded boards are trying to find board members with cyber experience. So I think that's, I know for us, it's a huge, not nice to have, but it's a huge addition to our board to have someone with cyber and IT expertise.
Mm-hmm. Must be a huge area of focus for risk management and safeguarding. Barbara, how about yourself? And I think the same is probably true on cyber.
Top three, absolutely. Oh yeah, it's absolutely in the top three. If organizations do not have a very proactive cyber strategy, if they're not providing, the board's not providing active cyber oversight to be sure that the conditions are in place, you have to have had a tested business resumption plan. All these things need to be in place for organizations nowadays. It's almost table stakes, isn't it? It's a core of a competency on boards now, as many others. To Wendy's point, it's not always easy to find the expertise in that area to be on board. So there may be other ways for the board to get that kind of expertise, maybe not by having somebody at the table, but certainly to help that the board is well aware of the potential risks. And there are a number of mechanisms to do just that.
Okay, fair enough. So I think we've just about come to the end. Deborah, are we right on time, right on the money?
Elaine, you are doing awesome, but there are two questions that are still out there, and I'm going to be the moderator to you, Elaine, because I know you get asked this question. And then the other one, I think Wendy or Barbara can. Is a director designation required to serve on a board, Elaine? I know we chat, Wendy, likewise, but I think, would you respond to that, please?
Sure. So I address this probably in every conversation I have with board candidates. No, you don't need a designation to get on a board. And there are a number of designations, and there are now, I think, at least 4 organizations that are providing education and training. And there's the ICD designation from the Institute of Corporate Directors. And then there's the Certified Director designation, which is to the Conference Board and McMaster. But there's also the Governance Professionals organization, and there's a new organization. I'm just drawing a blank on its name right now.
Competent boards. Yeah.
And Deborah's organization, Women Get On Board, run a number of programs, no designation, but they run a number of programs. So really the answer to that is being a board director is not a part-time thing you put on your resume. It is a profession. The profession of being a board director is professionalizing, and that means you have to stay current. It's legislation that is constantly evolving. There are issues that are constantly evolving, and the purpose of getting a designation or taking board governance education is to stay current with the trends, with what's happening, because you'll draw on that all the time. You don't need the designation to get on a board, but frankly, what's happening is as more and more people are taking people are retiring, or if people are at a point in their career where they want to get on boards, they are taking the designation. So I would say within 3 to 5 years, you likely won't get on a board without it. Increasingly, the people who are serving as chairs of the board, chairs of committees, are looking for designations, or they have them themselves and they're looking for it. It's not a requirement now, but I think it will be down the road. So, you know, and you don't have to take the designation. There are a lot of courses that are available through all these organizations that will help you in the meantime. And but certainly something to think about.
Thank you, Elaine. And I know Wendy and Barbara, but we're short on time on that one. And we have one last question that I'd like to turn to Barbara, because you're on 2 DACs. The question is, for DACs, isn't it a central application versus rather specific DAC? So do you want to just high level clarify that?
Sure. So here's what happens. There's a legislative requirement for external members to sit on these departmental audit committees, right? So when a vacancy comes up, the chief audit executive in a department or agency will speak with the center. It's a part of Treasury Board Secretariat around what their needs are, what their requirements, and the timing. So the requirements will come from the department or agency into the center, and then the center goes through a process to look for potential candidates, right? And those candidates can come from a number of sources. So the process is managed centrally. The Treasury Board approval is given centrally for those candidates. But when the candidates are identified, they are presented to the deputy head, who will make a decision whether or not the candidate is what they were looking for. So there is some back and forth. It is based on a set of department or agency requirements. The process is centralized and approved centrally through Treasury Board ministers. And again, it comes back to the deputy head to weigh in on the selection process of who would be appointed.
So I think we pretty much wrapped up the questions. What I will say to everyone that has attended today, we will do a follow-up, and we'll have a link to the Departmental Audit Committee website, so you can go in, and we'll have it to other public sector board appointments where you can go and look. So just as a FYI. So promise to have you out by 1. I want to thank Elaine, Wendy, and Barbara for sharing their great insights on how to get on and how to govern effectively on public sector boards. I think you have some very experienced individuals from the recruiting side right through to the chairing and serving on them. And I think we had some really great insights that you shared, so appreciate it. On behalf of Women Get On Board, we like to thank our speakers and donate for their time. We donate back to our charity partner, which is Dress for Success Toronto chapter. And I know their chair of that board is on this call. So over to you, Harriet. Thank you for running that organization. And we're delighted to have you as a charity partner. I also want to thank Odgers for being our sponsor. I've had really great fortune of working with Elaine and her colleagues, and they've been a phenomenal supporter of Women Get On Board over the years. So thank you, Elaine, and your colleagues. I also want to mention May 11th is our next Women Get On Board speaker series. The topic is The Great Chair. We will have the author of that book, The Great Chair, Brian Hayward, in a fireside chat, discussing some of the great techniques and tips as chairs of boards and to consider to be more effective in your chair role. So that is May 11th. You will get a follow-up thank you today with a link to that event. But more importantly, we also really appreciate your feedback. So there'll be a survey, and in a couple days, you'll receive a follow-up email with the recording from this session. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Be well and stay safe.
Thanks so much, Deborah. And thanks, Wendy and Barbara. Great.
Thank you.
Well done, ladies. Thank you.
Bye.